The algebra of functions. In this example, we're going to work with two functions. F of x is equal to x squared minus 3x plus 5, and g of x is equal to x plus 2. And using those two functions, we're going to get the calculator to graph their sum, one of their differences, their product, one of their quotients, and one of the compositions that we can make with them. Let's begin by putting these two functions into our y equals or function menu screen. So I'll press y equals, and I'm going to put f of x into y1. So I'm going to type in x squared minus 3x plus 5 and press enter. And then in y2 I'll put g of x. So I'm going to type in x plus 2 and press enter. And then let's take a look at the graph of these two functions. I'll do that in a standard window, so I'm going to press zoom and choose option 6. Calculator will graph y1 or f of x first. That's a quadratic function, so we're going to expect a parabolic graph, and we can see that we do indeed get one here. Then it'll graph y2 second. That's g of x, x plus 2, that's linear, so we expect a straight line, and we see that right here. Now if we wanted to go about graphing the sum of these two functions, we could take the two functions, add them together, come up with a new function f plus g, type that into the y equals menu and graph it. And then we could do similar things for the remaining functions that we want to take a look at here under the algebra of functions. But it turns out that the calculator is set up in such a way that we can do all of this without ever having to resort to paper and pencil and actually add or subtract, multiply, divide, etc. these two functions, one with or by the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the y equals menu, and I'm going to cursor down to y3. And what I want to do is I want to tell the calculator that in y3 we want to graph the sum of y1 and y2, that is the sum of f and g. So to get y1, we press the variables key, VARS, and then we cursor once to the right to the yVars menu. We press option 1 functions, and we choose y1. Then we'll say plus. Then we'll go back through a similar process to find y2. So we press variables, cursor once to the right for the y variables, choose the function y variables, and choose option number 2, y2. We can press enter, and then we can graph that as well. When we graph this, we'll graph all three things. We'll graph the original y1, the original y2, and the sum of the two. So let's press graph and see what we get. We'd already graphed y1 and y2 on this window, so all the calculator needs to do is add the graph of y3, which is our sum, f plus g. And we can see it coming in here on the screen. It comes in a little high and then takes off and goes out here. Now we may not be interested in seeing all three of these things at once. So one thing that we can do is we can go back into the y equals menu, and we can turn certain functions off for graphing. Instead of clearing them so that they won't graph, what we can do is cursor to the equal sign. And right now I'm highlighted on the equal sign that's flashing, and if I press enter, that'll turn that highlight off. And that tells the calculator, remember what that function is, but don't show it when you graph. I'll do the same thing for y2, and then I'll graph. And this should graph only the sum function, or in this case y3. And we'll wait a moment here as the calculator works through its various x values. And here is that sum function. Now we're not seeing a lot of it. If we needed to do anything more with it than we do in the specific example, you might want to adjust your window to see this function better. But I'm going to leave it just as it is there for now, because all we're trying to do is just graph and learn a little bit how to do this. The next thing we want to do in example 1 is graph the difference f minus g, in other words y1 minus y2. So if we go back into the y equals menu and we cursor down to y3, we can go to the plus sign and just simply replace it with a minus. We can press the minus key on the right and then press enter, and we've changed that to y1 minus y2, and now we can graph that. So we'll press the graph button. the calculator will now take f of x and subtract g of x. And it'll show us what that graph looks like given our two functions f and g. And you see we get something that looks still parabolic, because what we're doing is taking a quadratic and subtracting a linear, which simply just gives us a different kind of quadratic equation. So this is still a parabola, but it's a different parabola once again. All right. Let's move on to the product function, f times g. If we go back to the y equals menu and we go down to y3, cursor over so we're on the minus sign, we can change that now to multiplication. Press the times button on the right hand side, press enter. And now that we have that entered, we can graph the product. Now the product of a second degree or quadratic equation and a first degree or linear equation is going to be a third degree equation. So we're going to get a cubic in this case. And let's see what we get. The graph goes up. Looks like it comes down a little bit and then goes up again. And once again, what's probably the interesting portion of the graph is off the screen here a little bit. And if we needed to do anything more with this function, evaluate it, or learn a little bit about where those dips are, we would want to change the window, obviously, to see things better. But I'll leave that up to you if you want to play with this a little bit more. All right, 3 down, 2 to go. We want to look at f divided by g. So we'll go back to the y equals menu. We'll go down to y3, and we'll change that multiplication to a division. And we'll press enter. So now y3 is going to be y1 divided by y2. We can graph that, and we get the following picture, the quotient function f over g. We also could graph the quotient function g over f by looking at y2 divided by y1, in the same way that we also could have looked at the difference function g minus f by doing y2 minus y1. There are two different difference functions and two different quotient functions when we're dealing with two functions to begin with. This is not a parabola anymore. This is a somewhat more complex rational function. And we haven't really talked about the graphs of rational functions, and we're not really going to in this class. If you need to take more math, you may deal with that in more detail there. But this is a little bit of an idea of what that graph looks like. All right, the last thing we want to look at is the composite function. All right, so let's go back to the y equals menu. And let's work our way down here to y1. What we need to remember is that f circled g, or f composed with g, means that we want to look at f of g of x. In other words, in this case, we want to look at y1 of y2. So we're going to put y2 in parentheses. So I'm going to change the division symbol to a left parentheses. Then I'm going to move to the right and close that off. So now what this is going to do is it's going to take a look at a given value of x. It's going to evaluate y2, and then it's going to take that number, plug it into y1, and evaluate that. That's our composite function. So we'll press enter, we'll press graph, and we can see what this looks like. Now again, with all of these, you can evaluate, you can look at tables, there's all sorts of things you can do beyond just what I'm showing you here in connection with things you've seen in earlier videos. The purpose here is just simply to quickly show you the way that you can use the calculator to help you with the idea of algebra of functions. And there is our graph of f composed with g. You also could reverse that and do g composed with f, that is, take y2 of y1 in the calculator and see what happens if you plug f into g instead of g into f as we've done here.